Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're taking a closer look at blood sugar.
Yeah, always a hot topic, right? It seems like everyone's talking about blood sugar these days.
Absolutely, and for good reason. You guys sent in this really interesting presentation by Dr. Sten Ekberg, and he really goes deep on the topic, particularly focusing on the foods that can kind of wreak havoc on our blood sugar levels.
Right. He calls them blood sugar destroyers. I like that. It's a pretty catchy term.
It is. And so for this deep dive, we're going to break down Dr. Ekberg's top 10 categories of these blood sugar destroyers. We want to give you guys the info you need to understand why these foods have the impact they do, and, most importantly, what you can do to keep your blood sugar balanced and healthy.
Sounds good. It's all about practical steps, right?
Exactly. Now, Dr. Ackberg really stresses that keeping our blood sugar in check is about way more than just avoiding those energy crashes after a sugary snack. He links it to bigger issues like insulin resistance, prediabetes, and even type 2 diabetes.
And those are some serious conditions. We're not just talking about feeling a little sluggish here.
Right. He throws out this statistic that almost half the U.S. population is dealing with one of these conditions. And it's not just an American problem either. It's becoming a global trend. That's pretty alarming.
It is alarming, and when you consider the complications that can arise from type 2 diabetes, things like heart disease, liver cancer, stroke, even Alzheimer's disease, it's clear that this is something we need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. But the good news is that, as Dr. Ekberg emphasizes, often prediabetes is reversible. With the right knowledge and some lifestyle tweaks, you can get back on track and reclaim your metabolic health.
That's encouraging. So much of our health is within our control, isn't it?
It really is. So with that said, let's jump right into Dr. Ekberg's list of blood sugar destroyers. We'll start with something that might seem obvious, but trust me, there are some hidden dangers lurking here.
Sugary drinks.
Right. Sugary drinks. We all know soda is bad, right? Yeah, I think most people would agree with that. But what's interesting is that Dr. Ekberg doesn't stop at soda. He also includes energy drinks, sports drinks, those fancy coffee drinks loaded with syrups and sweeteners, sweet iced tea, and even fruit juice.
That last one might surprise some people. Fruit juice has a health halo for sure.
It does. But as Dr. Ekberg points out, it's all about the sugar content. A typical serving of many of these drinks can pack a whopping 30 to 50 grams of sugar. To put that in perspective, that's more than the recommended daily intake of added sugar for many adults in just one drink.
That's wild. And it's easy to forget that those natural sugars in fruit juice still impact your blood sugar just like the added sugars in soda.
Exactly. He debunks that whole natural versus added sugar argument, explaining that your body processes the sucrose in fruit juice into glucose and fructose, just like it does with table sugar. It's all sugar in the end.
I think that example he gives about the natural electrolyte drink on Amazon really drives this point home. It's marketed as having no added sugar but contains coconut water powder.
Which is basically just another form of concentrated sugar, right?
Right. It's all about reading labels carefully and not being fooled by marketing claims. Now, when we talk about the impact of these sugary drinks on our blood sugar, Dr. Ekberg makes an important distinction between immediate and long-term effects.
Yeah, he talks about those immediate blood sugar spikes you get after consuming something with a high glycemic index.
Right. That sudden surge in blood glucose is your body's natural response to a large influx of sugar. But the real concern is the long-term damage that repeated exposure to these high sugar loads can cause.
He links it to the development of insulin resistance, which basically means your body becomes less efficient at processing sugar, leading to a whole cascade of health problems.
It's not just about that immediate sugar rush and crash. It's about the cumulative effect on your body's ability to regulate blood sugar over time.
Okay, let's move on to category number 2 on Dr. Ekberg's list,
Yeah.
grains. And he's specifically talking about refined grains.
And he makes it clear that even whole grains aren't off the hook when it comes to blood sugar control.
I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. We're told to choose whole grains over refined grains, but it's not quite that simple.
Right. To really understand this, we need to talk about the glycemic index, or GI, which Dr. Ekberg explains is a measure of how quickly a food raises your blood sugar. Pure glucose has a GI of 100, and other foods are ranked relative to that.
So the higher the GI, the faster and more dramatically your blood sugar spikes after eating that food.
Exactly. Now, when you look at the GI values of different grains, it's pretty revealing. White bread has a GI of around 75 to 85. Whole wheat bread is a bit lower, but still pretty high, around 65 to 80. And even those healthier options like sprouted bread and sourdough, while they have a slightly lower GI, are still not down in that ideal low GI range.
It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? We're so used to thinking of brown rice as the healthier choice, but Dr. Ekberg points out that it actually has a similar GI to white rice.
It really highlights the importance of understanding the glycemic index and how it can affect your blood sugar. So, the takeaway here is that if you're trying to maintain stable blood sugar levels, all grains, even those less refined varieties, should be consumed in moderation.
And if you're particularly sensitive to blood sugar swings, you might even want to limit them significantly or avoid them altogether.
Exactly. Now, let's move on to category number 3, cereals and porridge. I think this is another area where people might be surprised.
Yeah, while most of us wouldn't consider a bowl of Fruit Loops a health food, there's a perception that some cereals, especially those marketed as heart healthy or high in fiber, are good breakfast choices.
But when you look at the numbers Dr. Egberg presents, it's pretty clear that most cereals are loaded with carbs, which can translate to significant blood sugar spikes.
Yeah.
He breaks down the net carb content per 100 grams of various cereals, and it's eye-opening. Fruit Loops come in at a staggering 85 grams, Frosted Flakes at 83, Corn Flakes at 81, Rice Krispies at 87, and even plain oatmeal has 50 grams.
And then when you factor in the added sugar, it gets even worse. Those kids' cereals can have upwards of 37 grams of sugar per 100 grams.
Even seemingly plain options like Corn Flakes and Rice Krispies still have around 8 or 9 grams of sugar.
Plain oatmeal, without any additions, is actually quite low in sugar, only about 1 gram. But, as Dr. Ekberg points out, most people don't eat their oatmeal plain. They add sweeteners, dried fruit, all sorts of things that quickly bump up the sugar content. And those instant-flavored oatmeals are often loaded with sugar too, some containing around 22 grams.
The bottom line is that most cereals, even those that seem healthy, are essentially just a bowl full of carbs that will spike your blood sugar. Dr. Ekberg suggests avoiding most of them altogether, and even with plain oatmeal, he recommends choosing steel-cut oats and being mindful of what you add to it.
Okay, next on the list are those healthy snacks, and I think we all know the ones he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Granola bars, protein bars, trail mix.
It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking these are nutritious choices, especially when you're busy and need something on the go. But Dr. Ekberg breaks down the truth about these snacks, and it's not pretty.
He points out that they're often surprisingly high in carbs and sugar. Granola bars can have around 60 grams of net carbs and 29 grams of sugar per 100 grams. Protein bars are similar, with around 56 grams of net carbs and a comparable amount of sugar. And even trail mix, which many people think of as a healthy snack, can have a whopping 66 grams of net carbs and 25 grams of sugar.
And that's mainly due to the added sweeteners and dried fruit. When you opt for a plain nut and seed mix, the carbs and sugar drop dramatically. He suggests making your own trail mix using lower carb nuts like almonds, pecans, walnuts, and macadamia nuts along with seeds. That way, you can control the ingredients and keep the carbs and sugar to a minimum.
That's a great tip. Okay, next up is candy. This one might seem obvious, but there are some nuances here worth discussing, especially when it comes to sugar-free alternatives.
Right. We all know that regular candy is basically pure sugar. But what about those sugar-free options? Are they any better?
Well, Dr. Ekberg points out that some sugar-free candies use maltitol, which is a sugar alcohol. It has about half the impact of regular sugar on blood sugar and calories, but it can cause digestive issues for some people.
He's more cautious about artificial sweeteners like sucralose and aspartame, suggesting that they might have negative impacts on the brain and gut health, and might even increase appetite.
And then there's dark chocolate, which a lot of people consider a healthier indulgence.
Dr. Ekberg says it really depends on the percentage of cocoa. The higher the cocoa content, the lower the sugar content. He recommends choosing dark chocolate with at least 85% cocoa solids to keep the sugar in check.
Okay, moving on to number 6 on the list. Yogurt. This is another tricky one because there's such a range of yogurt products out there.
Right. You've got your sugary fruit yogurts, your frozen yogurts that are basically like ice cream, and then your plain yogurts, which can vary in sugar content depending on how they're made.
Dr. Ekberg warns against those low-fat fruit yogurts, which can have as much as 30 grams of sugar per serving, more than a can of soda. And frozen yogurt is pretty much in the same category as ice cream, so it's best to avoid that too.
When it comes to plain yogurt, he points out that the sourness is a good indicator of how much lactose, the natural sugar in milk, has been fermented.
So a less sour yogurt means it probably has more lactose, which can impact your blood sugar.
Exactly. He gives a cool DIY tip for making your own yogurt with reduced lactose. He says to use a mix of regular milk and half and let it ferment for a longer period, like 48 to 60 hours. That helps break down more of the lactose.
All right, on to number 7, starchy snacks. This category covers a lot of our favorite crunchy, salty treats.
Things like potato chips, baked chips, crackers, pretzels, rice cakes, popcorn, even those veggie chips and sticks.
It's easy to mindlessly munch on these, but Dr. Ekberg warns that they can send your blood sugar soaring.
He points out that many of those veggie chips and sticks are just made from extracted starch that's been deep fried, so they're not really much healthier than regular potato chips.
And regardless of whether they're baked or fried, most starchy snacks are quickly broken down into glucose in your body, leading to those blood sugar spikes we're trying to avoid.
So if you're watching your blood sugar, it's best to steer clear of these snacks. Now let's talk about category number 8, fast food and deli. This one's a biggie.
Yeah, I think a lot of us rely on fast food and deli meals for convenience, but they can be real blood sugar saboteurs.
Dr. Ekberg calls out the usual suspects: burgers and fries, hot dogs, fried chicken, chicken sandwiches, even those Subway-type sandwiches that some people consider a healthier option.
He says the problem is that most of these meals are loaded with starch from the bread and fries, hidden sugar in the buns and sauces, unhealthy seed oils, and a ton of additives and preservatives.
He does acknowledge that a Subway-type sandwich might be slightly better because you can load up on veggies, but he emphasizes that the overall impact is still significant.
And when it comes to deli meats, he says it's all about quality. Those highly processed deli meats are best avoided, but if you can find good quality deli meat from a reputable source, it can be okay in moderation.
Now, on to number 9, alcohol. This one's interesting because I think a lot of people don't realize how much alcohol can affect their blood sugar.
Right. Dr. Ekberg points out that alcohol can cause both immediate blood sugar spikes and long-term metabolic damage.
He explains that sugary mixed drinks are the biggest culprits when it comes to those immediate spikes because they contain a lot of sugar in addition to the alcohol.
Beer generally has very little sugar, but it does contain carbs that can be converted into glucose.
Dry wine is a better choice because it's low in both sugar and carbs.
And distilled spirits, like vodka and whiskey, have zero sugar and zero carbs, but they still have those long-term metabolic effects to consider.
So if you're going to drink alcohol, Dr. Ekberg recommends sticking to dry wine or spirits in moderation.
And he suggests limiting yourself to 1 or 2 drinks per day, no more than 4 days a week, to give your body a chance to recover.
Finally, we've reached the last category on Dr. Ekberg's list: vegan and gluten-free alternatives. Now, he's not saying that vegan or gluten-free diets are bad, but he cautions against relying on processed alternatives.
I think a lot of people assume that anything vegan or gluten-free is automatically healthier, but that's not always the case.
He explains that many of these alternatives, like vegan ice cream, meat substitutes, and gluten-free breads, are often made with high glycemic starches that can spike your blood sugar even more than the original foods they're replacing.
And he warns about those plant-based milks, which often have added sugar. Always choose unsweetened varieties.
So if you're following a vegan or gluten-free diet, it's essential to prioritize whole, unprocessed foods.
Okay, so that was a deep dive into Dr. Ekberg's top 10 blood sugar destroyers. It's a lot of information to take in.
It is, but the takeaway here is that being aware of these foods and understanding how they can impact your blood sugar is incredibly empowering.
By making conscious choices about what you eat and drink, you can take control of your blood sugar and improve your overall health. What struck me most about Dr. Ekberg's presentation is how prevalent these so-called normal foods are in our modern diet. It makes you think, doesn't it? How might simply being more mindful of these everyday choices make a huge difference in the long run?
It's definitely food for thought. I know I'll be looking at my grocery list a little differently after this.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, we hope you found this deep dive informative and helpful. If you're interested in learning more about blood sugar regulation and metabolic health, there are tons of resources available online and in books. And remember, small changes can make a big difference. Start by focusing on incorporating more whole, unprocessed foods into your diet, and you'll be well on your way to a healthier, more balanced you.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you.